This episode of Into the Music is brought to you by Coda Music. It's a great way to discover new music and listen to all of your favorite artists for free. The link is in the description. In today's episode we're going to explore the Beatles. So much has been said and written about the Beatles, and their story is so mythic in its sweep, that it's difficult to summarize their career without restating clichés that have already been digested by tens of millions of rock fans. To start with the obvious, they were the greatest and most influential act of the rock era, and they introduced more innovations into popular music than any other group of their time. Moreover, they were among the few artists of any discipline that were simultaneously the best at what they did and the most popular at what they did. Relentlessly imaginative and experimental, the Beatles grabbed hold of the international mass consciousness in 1964 and never let go for the next 6 years, always staying ahead of the pack in terms of creativity and never losing the ability to communicate their increasingly sophisticated ideas to a mass audience. Their supremacy as rock icons remains unchallenged to this day, decades after their breakup in 1970. It's hard to convey the scope of the Beatles' achievements in a mere paragraph or two. They synthesized all that was good about early rock and roll, and changed it into something original and even more exciting. They established the prototype for the self-contained rock group that wrote and performed its own material. As composers, their craft and melodic inventiveness were second to none. They were key to the evolution of rock from its blues/R&B based forms into a style that was far more eclectic, but equally visceral. As singers, both John Lennon and Paul McCartney were among the best and most expressive vocalists in rock, and the group's harmonies were intricate and exhilarating. As performers, they were, at least until touring wore them down, exciting and photogenic. When they retreated into the studio, they proved instrumental in pioneering advanced techniques and multi-layered arrangements. They were also the first British rock group to achieve worldwide prominence, launching a British invasion that made rock truly an international phenomenon. More than any other top group, the Beatles' success was very much a case of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. Their phenomenal cohesion was due in large degree to most of the group having known each other and played together in Liverpool for about 5 years before they began to have hit records. Guitarist and teenage rebel John Lennon got hooked on rock and roll in the mid-50s, and formed a band, the Quarrymen, at his high school. Around mid-1957, the Quarrymen were joined by another guitarist, Paul McCartney, nearly 2 years Lennon's junior. A bit later they were joined by another guitarist, George Harrison, a friend of McCartney. The Quarrymen would change lineups constantly in the late 50s, eventually reducing to the core trio of guitarists, who'd proven themselves to be the best musicians and most personally compatible individuals within the band. The Quarrymen changed their name to the Silver Beatles in 1960, quickly dropping the silver to become just the Beatles. Lennon's art college friend Stuart Sutcliffe joined on bass, but finding a permanent drummer was a vexing problem until Pete Best joined in the summer of 1960. He successfully auditioned for the combo just before they left for a several-month stint in Hamburg, Germany. Hamburg was the Beatles' baptism by fire. Playing grueling sessions for hours on end in one of the most notorious red light districts in the world, the group was forced to expand its repertoire, tighten up its chops, and invest its show with enough manic energy to keep the rowdy crowd satisfied. When they returned to Liverpool at the end of 1960, the band, formerly also ran on the exploding Liverpudlian beat scene, were suddenly the most exciting act on the local circuit. They consolidated their following in 1961 with constant gigging in the Merseyside area, most often at the legendary Cavern Club, the incubator of the Mersey beat sound. They also returned for engagements in Hamburg during 1961, although Sutcliffe dropped out of the band that year to concentrate on his art school studies there. McCartney took over on bass, Harrison settled in as lead guitarist, and Lennon had rhythm guitar, everyone sang. In mid-1961, the Beatles minus Sutcliffe made their first recordings in Germany, as a backup group to a British rock guitarist/singer based in Hamburg, Tony Sheridan. The Beatles hadn't fully developed at this point, and these recordings, many of which including a couple of Sheridan-less tracks were issued only after the band's rise to fame, found their talents in a most embryonic state. The Hamburg stint was also notable for gaining the Beatles' sophisticated, artistic fans such as Sutcliffe's girlfriend, Astrid Kirchherr, who influenced all of them except Best to restyle their quiffs into the mope tops that gave the musicians their most distinctive visual trademark. Tragically, Sutcliffe would die of a brain hemorrhage in April 1962. Near the end of 1961, the Beatles' exploding local popularity caught the attention of local record store manager Brian Epstein, who was soon managing the band as well. He used his contacts to swiftly acquire a January 1, 1962, audition at Decca Records that has been heavily bootlegged. Some tracks were officially released in 1995. After weeks of deliberation, Decca turned them down, as did several other British labels. Epstein's perseverance was finally rewarded with an audition for producer George Martin at Parlophone, an EMI subsidiary. Martin signed the Beatles in mid-1962. By this time, Epstein was assiduously grooming his charges for national success by influencing them to smarten up their appearance, dispensing with their leather jackets and trousers in favor of tailored suits and ties. One more major change was in the offing before the Beatles made their Parlophone debut. In August 1962, drummer Pete Best was kicked out of the group, a controversial decision that has been the cause of much speculation since. There is still no solid consensus as to whether it was because of his solitary, moody nature, the other Beatles' jealousy of his popularity with the fans, his musical shortcomings. George Martin had already told Epstein that Best wasn't good enough to drum on recordings, or his refusal to wear his hair in bangs. What seems most likely was that the Beatles simply found his personality incompatible, preferring to enlist Ringo Starr-born Richard Starkey, a drummer with another popular Merseyside outfit, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. Starr had been in the Beatles for a few weeks when they recorded their first single, Love Me Do P.S. I Love You, in September 1962. Both sides of the 45 were Lennon, McCartney originals, and the songwriting team would be credited with most of the group's material throughout the Beatles' career. The single, a promising but fairly rudimentary effort, hovered around the lower reaches of the British top 20. The Beatles phenomenon didn't truly kick in until Please Please Me, which topped the British charts in early 1963. This was the prototype British invasion single, an infectious melody, charging guitars, and positively exuberant harmonies. The same traits were evident on their third 45, From Me to You, a British #1, and their debut LP, Please Please Me. Although it was mostly recorded in a single day, Please Please Me topped the British charts for an astonishing 30 weeks, establishing the group as the most popular rock and roll act ever seen in the UK. What the Beatles had done was take the best elements of the rock and pop they loved and make them their own. Since the Quarrymen days, they had been steeped in the classic early rock of Elvis, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Carl Perkins, and the Everly Brothers. They'd also kept an ear open to the early 60s sounds of Motown, Phil Spector, and the girl groups. What they added was an unmatched songwriting savvy inspired by bro-building teams such as Jerry Goffin and Carole King, a brash guitar-oriented attack, wildly enthusiastic vocals, and the embodiment of the youthful flair of their generation, ready to dispense with post-war austerity and claim a culture of their own. They were also unsurpassed in their eclecticism, willing to borrow from blues, popular standards, gospel, folk, or whatever seemed suitable for their musical vision. Producer George Martin was the perfect foil for the group, refining their ideas without tinkering with their cores. During the last half of their career, he was indispensable for his ability to translate their concepts into arrangements that required complex orchestration, innovative applications of recording technology, and an ever-widening array of instruments. Just as crucially, the Beatles were never ones to stand still and milk formulas. All of their subsequent albums and singles would show remarkable artistic progression, though never at the expense of a damn catchy tune. Even on their second LP, with the Beatles 1963, it was evident that their talents as composers and instrumentalists were expanding furiously, as they devised ever more inventive melodies and harmonies, and boosted the fullness of their arrangements. She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand established the group not just as a popular music act, but as a phenomenon never before seen in the British entertainment business, as each single sold over 1 million copies in the UK after some celebrated national TV appearances. Beatlemania broke out across the British Isles in late 1963, and the group generating screams and hysteria at all of their public appearances, musical or otherwise. Capitol, which had first refusal of the Beatles recordings in the United States, had declined to issue the group's first few singles,
which ended up appearing on relatively small American independents. Capitol took up its option on I Want to Hold Your Hand, which stormed to